When we hear the historical accounts of Scripture, we tend to receive them as stories. Often we first heard these stories as children. But an unfortunate aspect of this is that we sometimes think of them simplistically, as mere stories with simple moral lessons, such as a biblical Aesop's fable. There are such teaching stories in Scripture. They're called parables. But we have to remember that most of what we think of as Bible stories are actual historical accounts. And so we have to think of them in terms of a much broader perspective. We need to see the political, social, and economic aspects of these stories and their settings, not just see them as a simple morality lesson. For instance, when we read that Abraham lied about his wife Sarah and called her his sister, we know that it was in fear of his life. It was in fear that his life would be taken so another man could have Sarah. Now, it's easy to shake a finger at Abraham and say he should have trusted God and told the truth. But that story tells us far more. It tells us of the cultural context in which Abraham lived. It was a very pagan culture. Abraham knew that there was a distinct possibility he could be killed. Sarah could be taken by another man, and all their wealth then appropriated by that man. That was the culture in which Abraham lived. Likewise, Abraham's great-grandson, Joseph, when he was sold into slavery, knew he had no legal recourse. He never tried to appeal his case. There was no justice system or standard of justice to which he could appeal. He had no rights as a foreign slave. With that in mind, note what God did for his people as soon as he made them independent, as soon as he set them free of Egypt. He gave them his law. He gave them his justice, which in Scripture is always synonymous with righteousness. So God gave them a law for their culture that was 100% morally righteous. Well, this tells us something. When we look at the law of God and see it as burdensome, we're saying that God is a burden, because we're saying God's law, God's character revealed in his law, is a burden. Abraham wouldn't have seen God's law and its standard of justice as a burden. It would have been much preferable to the culture in which he lived. Joseph wouldn't have seen God's law as a burden. It would have given him an appeal on which to base his demand for justice. God's law was the greatest blessing God could have given his people. God did not throw these Hebrews into Canaanite culture and its fertility cults and say, do the best you can given the circumstances. No, he told them to create a whole new culture, and he gave them a law that would help them create a different kind of culture. God said, this is the way, walk ye in it. And he laid out blessings if they conform themselves to his law, and curses if they rebelled against it. Because, as Proverbs 8:36 says, he that sinneth against me wrongeth his own soul. All they that hate me love death. The culture that had prevailed in that part of the world was a culture of death, and certainly of injustice. God gave them something better. He gave them justice. Well, in addition to seeing biblical history as simplistic morality tales, we also tend to see it as we did as children. This is somewhat inevitable. Have you ever gone someplace you hadn't been since you were a child and been amazed at the different physical perspective you now had? Or have you ever, as an adult, made an obvious connection you never made about something in your childhood? Your memory is based upon your perspectives as a child. We tend not to rethink our childish perspectives, such as, why was I not allowed to go to so-and-so's house? When we rethink our childish perspectives as adults, all sorts of different factors come into view. We need to rethink Bible stories, because there's far more meat there than we ever realized. Our view of Bible stories is often the same simplistic view we had as children. I'll give one more example, the Tower of Babel. I can still see the pictures from my early Sunday school lessons. And of course the impression left was those silly people. They tried to build a building so tall it would reach to heaven. But was that their motive, to touch heaven? Was their error so blatantly ludicrous? Or was their error even in just not spreading out to inhabit the earth as God had commanded? Again, the attempt to build a city and a monument implies a social context, an economic context, and a philosophical idea. They were trying to build something to rival heaven, to represent the divine, to be a manifestation of heaven on earth. They wanted to be the greatest civilization on earth that would be the center of man's life and attention. They wanted to be a civilization that would awe and inspire. Babel was not just about foolish men trying to do something ridiculous in order to access heaven. Such a goal would have been doomed to failure. God wouldn't have had to intervene in order to stop it. Babel was man trying to create a divine order on earth. Babel had a centralized political life and a centralized economy. They couldn't have undertaken such monument building without that. So Babel had to have been a powerful state that tried to memorialize its power in a physical monument. If we think of Babel in this way, then Babel is a dream that is still with us. Our modern humanistic states create monuments of different sorts, but still they try to build themselves up as manifestations of power and greatness. Now they do it by eliminating God and heaven from public discourse entirely. We need to rethink our immature perspectives on biblical history. We need to lose those flannel graph Bible images and see the accounts of Scripture for all that they can teach us.